Part 4 of A Christmas Carol, where in just a little while we will meet the ghost of Christmas Present. A small matter, said the ghost, to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Small, echoed Scrooge. The spirit sighed to him to listen to the two apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves the praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously, like his former, not later self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks and things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives us is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No. I should like to have been able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eyes, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghosts of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if I can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is in the even-handed dwelling of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing in profession to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you." She shook her head. "Am I?" "Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor, and content to be so until, in good season, we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man." "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Your own feelings tells you that you are not what you are," she returned. "I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly have I thought of this, and I will not say, is it enough that I have thought of it and can release you? Have I ever sought release? In words, no, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us," said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? Ah, no." He seemed to yield to the justice of the supposition in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not?" "I would gladly think otherwise if I could," she answered. "Heaven knows, when I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, you who in your very confidence with her weigh everything by gain, or choosing her if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so. Do I know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak with her head turned from him. She resumed, "You may, the memory of what is past, have, makes me hope you will, have pain in this, a very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as if an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life that you have chosen." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?" "One shadow more," explained the ghost. "No more," cried Scrooge. "No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more." But the relentless ghost pined him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. There was another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fires and a beautiful young girl, so like the last, Scrooge believed it was the same until he saw her, now a matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in the room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count, and unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, there were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and the daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much, and the latter soon beginning to mingle in the sport, got pillaged by the young braggarts most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them, though I never could have been so rude. No, no. I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed the braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life. And as to measuring her waist in sport as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done. I should have expected my arms to have grown round it for punishment and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond price. In short, should have liked, I do confess, to have the lightest license of a child, and yet have been man enough to know its value. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she was, with a laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards the centre of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home, attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. The shouting and the struggling and the onslaught that was made of the defenceless porter, the scaling him with the chairs for ladders, to dive into his pockets, to despoil him of a brown paper parcels, hold on tight, hug him round the neck, pummel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection, the shouts of wonder and delight, which were the development of every package that was received, the terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into his mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter, the immense relief of finding this a false alarm, the joy and gratitude and ecstasy, they were all indescribable alike. It was enough that by degrees the children and the emotions got out of that parlor, and by one stair at a time, up to the top of the house when they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more intently than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at the fireside, when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" "Guess." "How can I know?" "Tut, don't I know?" she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. "Mr. Scrooge? Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and it was not shut up. He had a candle inside, and I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe." "Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "remove me from this place." "I told you these were shadows of things that have been," said the ghost. "That they are what they are, do not blame me." "Remove me!" Scrooge exclaimed. "I cannot bear it." He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which, in some strange way, there was fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. "Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer." In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance of its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that the light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with the influence over him, he seized the extinguisher's cape, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon his head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with the force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted, overcome by irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cape a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and he had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Stave 3. The second of the three spirits. Awakening in the middle of a tough snore and sitting up on his bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time, for the special purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains the new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all around the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plume themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being unusually equal to the time of day, express a wide range of their capacity for adventure, by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects, without venturing, for Scrooge could quite as heartily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Not being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light which streamed upon him when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which began only light, was alarming, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, and he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at this very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it's always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At last, I say, began to think that the source and the secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on the further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls, ceilings were hung with living green, that it looked a perfect grove from every part of which gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time or Marley's, or for many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrows of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. It was an easy state. Upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in the shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. "Come in!" exclaimed the ghost. "Come in, and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas Present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. The garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, and as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by anything. Its feet, observably beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it bore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as if its genial face, its sparkling eyes, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the antique sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the like of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brother born in these later years," pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas Present rose. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruits, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night, and they stood in the city streets on this Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music, and scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings and from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plumbing down into the road below and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been plowed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheel of carts and wagons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other 100 times, where the great street branched off and made intricate channels, hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if the chimneys in Great Britain had, but one consent, caught fire and were blazing away to their dear heart's content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet was there an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and the brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from where they stood, and now they exchanged a fantastious snowball, better natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts shaped like waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness as the girls, as they went by and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in the blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks that people's mouths might water gracious as they passed. There were piles of filiberts, mossy and brown, recalling in the fragrance ancient walk among the woods, and pleasant, shuffling ankles deep through withered leaves. There were squab and swarthy, setting off yellow and oranges and lemons in great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. There, the very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant blooded race appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in a slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, oh, the grocers, nearly closed, with perhaps two shutters down or one. But though those gaps such glimpse, it was not alone that these scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattling up and down like jiggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruit so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers on feel faint, and subsequently, nor was it for the figs that the figs were moist and pulpy, and or that the French plums blushed in the modest tartness for their highly decorated boxes, or everything was good to eat, and it was and in its Christmas dress. But the customers were all so hurried and eager in hopeful promise of the day that they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the like mistakes in the best humor possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their aprons behind must have been their own worn outside for general inspection, and for Christmas draws to a peak, as if they choose. But soon the steeples called the good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces, and all the same they emerged from scores by street lanes, nameless, turning, innumerable people carrying their dinners to their bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, as he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as the bearers passed, sprinkling incense on the diners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice when there were angry words between dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly, for they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all the diners, and the progress of their cooking in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if the stones were cooking too. Is there a peculiar flavor in which you sprinkle from your torch? Asked Scrooge. There is, my own. Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day? Asked Scrooge. To any kindly given, to a poor one most. Why to a poor one most? Asked Scrooge. Because it needs it the most. Spirit, said Scrooge, after a moment's thought, I wonder, you and all the beings in this many worlds about us should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment. I, cried the spirit. You would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all, said Scrooge, wouldn't you? I, cried the spirit. You seek to close these places on the seventh day, said Scrooge, and it comes to the same thing. I seek, exclaimed the spirit. Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family, said Scrooge. There are some of us upon this earth of yours, returned the spirit, who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us as our own kin, and as if they have never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not on us.